art, towards the end of the artic, he's offering the peacock fan. And as he looks out to offer it to the devotees, the smile on his face is unbelievable. It was like one who'd conquered the earth. He'd done it. He'd installed Krishna and Balaram in Vrindavan, and you could just read his face. It was full of bliss, full of happiness.
When Srila Prabhupada gave the lecture on the day of their installation, he gave the lecture in Hindi, so it would have been directed to the local guests. And he was begging forgiveness from all the personalities there for any offenses. And that struck me.
There were days of speeches by different godbrothers and learned men of Vrindavan. In particular, I remember there was one speech given by Srila Goswami, where Srila Goswami gave extensive scriptural evidence of how persons who were not members of the Vedic culture could be elevated to the platform of Brahmins and Vaisnavas. And Prabhupada was quite pleased with that speech. It was given in Hindi, but Prabhupada gave a summary afterwards.
And the other thing I'll never forget is the quantity of pink rose petals. And there was this like abundance of pink rose petals that you were actually kind of up to our ankles on the floor. It was so special. After Mangalarti, we were all making garlands for Krishna and Balaram. And one day there were lots of broken flowers left that couldn't be used for the garlands. So I had them all in this sheet that we'd been using on top of the floor to make them in. And I took them and I showered them over Srila Prabhupada from the balcony in the guest house. And then he gave this instruction that we shouldn't waste the flowers. Srila Prabhupada was very conscious, in India particularly, of wasting the money. He knew how to protect the flowers so they'd stay fresh for longer. He told us to wrap them in damp cloths and hang them in a cold place. He knew everything about flowers, it seemed to us. But also he didn't want us to waste. Even though, practically speaking, the flowers couldn't be used, he still wanted to teach us not to waste. And he considered that showering flowers on him like the demigods in the heavenly planets a waste of flowers. So I never did that again.
The Vrindavan project was actually the very first real temple in ISKCON. This established Prabhupada so much in Vrindavan. I think he felt very good about that. Because actually Bombay was started earlier, but it was stopped because of the court cases. And I think at that time he was trying to get Bombay first. And then everything was blocked there. And Mayapur was a long-term project. It wasn't so urgent. And then Vrindavan became priority. So it only took about 2 years to build Vrindavan, less than 2 years. Most ashrams and temples, they went very slow. When money came there, they would build something. And ours went very fast, very quickly done. And that was the same in Bombay, actually. Of course, Vrindavan had beautiful buildings, very classic buildings, but the standards were not very high in most of them. They were sort of run down a little bit. They were dark inside, and they didn't have much life, actually. And then this one was just so clean and fresh and lively, and there was just, everything was beautiful in there. And that's what people felt also when they would come to the temple. It sort of woke up Vrindavan.
There was a parade, quite an elaborate procession through the streets of Vrindavan. There was an elephant, there was a Shanai band, and all the devotees doing kirtan. It was quite a commotion with all of this procession going through. Prabhupada seemed to be very beaming and happy. He was walking at the head of the procession, and which now that I think of it, must have been quite funny for people who knew him from before. And here he is with an elephant, a Shanai band, and all these Western disciples walking through the streets where he had walked so many times as a sadhu. And we walked quite a ways. It seemed like a very, very long walk through the city.
The procession, it was like something out of the Bhagavatam. decorated cows and bulls, brass bands, drums, kirtan parties, thousands of people. Residents came out of their homes, their businesses, as Prabhupada walked by, offering him water, flowers, and similar gifts. I remember that day I heard that Prabhupada wasn't well. The devotees wanted him to sit on a palanquin. It was a very long procession, but he refused. He walked the whole way.
They had a Rath, because that's the tradition. There's a Rath, and the spiritual master rides on the Rath, and then there's a procession. And there were hundreds of devotees. And at one point, Prabhupada decided he wanted to get off the Rath and walk with us. So when he did that, everyone just wanted to come and touch Prabhupada's feet at the same time, especially the Indian-bodied people who would come to the festival. So immediately, I think it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he was there, he organized us into human chains. We locked arms on either side of Prabhupada. So we went along the procession like that, keeping people from, crushing Prabhupada. During that procession, at times we would be farther away from Prabhupada, and at times we would be closer to Prabhupada. The farther away you got from Prabhupada, it was like being in a hurricane. It was just chaos. And as we came closer to Prabhupada, it got calmer and calmer and calmer, until when we were right next to Prabhupada, it was like we were in the eye of a hurricane. I mean, it was so calm and serene, and Prabhupada was just emanating this ecstasy. And it was a very stark realization of the consciousness that the empowered pure devotee had. He could change the atmosphere, not just in a room where everything was organized perfectly, but he could change the atmosphere anywhere.
Prabhupada designed Krishna and Balaram deities, the mudra. He made a drawing, gave it to Bhardraj to have it made in Jaipur. There's no Krishna Balaram deity like this, with Balaram resting his arm on Krishna's shoulders. There's no deity like that. Prabhupada made that design. And then he would joke about it. Who is stronger, Krishna or Balaram? Bala means strength. He's the strong one. And everyone would say, Balaram. And then Prabhupada said, then why Balaram is resting on Krishna? This means Krishna is stronger.
So the bank was right under the guest house. That's actually where Prabhupada's room is now, where we have Bhagavad Gita class. They opened a bank, and all the devotees crowded in, and Prabhupada was inside, and he was inaugurating the bank. And he told this joke. I was craning through the little screen window to hear what he was saying. He said, so one man heard that money attracts money. So he went into the bank and he put his money on the counter. And the teller took his money and put it in the till and said, yes, can I help you? And the man said, well, I heard that money attracts money. So I put my money there. And he said, yes, but our money has attracted your money. And Prabhupada laughed, and everyone laughed. And that was his joke that he told.